One conspiracy after another proven true. UFO crash retrievals hits the mainstream discussion, but why? Well, we have to have a little bit more patience. From what John Ratcliffe informed us, June 1st we will have a UFO disclosure by the Department of Defense Pentagon. They'll start disclosing what they have on file. This is by Arjun Walia on Humans Are Free. A recently published article in the New Yorker written by Gideon Lewis Krauss, previously a writer at large in New York Times Magazine, goes quite in depth about the UFO phenomenon. It's always great when the topic attains more legitimacy within the mainstream, but it's unfortunate that something has to be presented in this fashion for it to receive legitimacy. The article mentions the topic of UFO crash retrievals, which is the idea that governments have, in this case the US government, recovered debris from crashed UFOs. Now obviously we think of UFOs and extraterrestrial technologies being really advanced technology, but if they crash, they can't be that advanced obviously. But going on with the article, it mentions Harry Reid, a retired American attorney and politician who served as a United States Senator in Nevada from 1987 to 2017. Reid has been quite active in trying to get Congress and others within the government to look into this issue more in order to bring it out into the public domain. Kindly support my Patreon account since YouTube has again demonetized my YouTube channel. The daily posts are 5 videos daily, and they are totally different from what I have on my YouTube channel. Thank you so much for your support and that you find all my content so interesting. You'll find the Patreon account details in the description box below. And there are those who have been retired from the NASA and various technical agencies saying that yes, they have seen UFO crash retrievals and reverse technology. Now, going back to the article, we already know that the Pentagon has and has had programs to study the phenomenon. This is a matter of public record. The agency disclosed to the public is called Unidentified Aerial Phenomenon Task Force, or UFO Task Force. But remember that the United States has a history of government agencies existing in secret for years. The National Security Agency, the NSA, was founded in 1952. Its existence was hidden until the mid-1960s. Even more secretive is the National Reconnaissance Office, which was founded in 1960 but remained completely secret for 30 years. And according to the article, Reid states that he, quote, was told for decades that Lockheed had some of these retrieved materials, and I tried to get, as I recall, a classified approval by the Pentagon to have me go look at the stuff. They would not approve that. I don't know what all the numbers were, what kinds of classification it was, but they would not give that to me, Reid said. Krauss reached out to Lockheed, but there was no response. Speaking of Lockheed, Steve Justice, a recently retired director of advanced systems at Lockheed Skunk Works, has also alluded to the idea that this type of technology is in fact real. He's been quite outspoken about the black budget world and crafts that can mimic the capabilities that are observed in unidentified aerial phenomena, or UFO, by, as he announced, he once said, employing a driver system that alters the space-time metric. He once stated, quote, "We have glimpses of how the physics of this works, but we need to harvest technology from the science division to realize the capability," end quote. I saw him state this during a live stream as well, when he was with To the Stars Academy. He has since left this organization. His statement is another way of saying that these technologies exist within the science division, wherever they may be. This is an idea that has been given credibility by many high-ranking people from within various governments. For example, Apollo 13 astronaut Dr. Edgar Mitchell once told the world that, quote, "Yes, there have been crashed craft and bodies recovered," end quote. He is seen making these statements in this documentary. Now, Eric W. Davis, a renowned astrophysicist who worked with the Pentagon UFO program, stated that he gave a classified briefing to the Defense Department agency as recently as March of 2020 about retrievals from off-world vehicles not made on this Earth. So where were they made then? On the moon? On Mars? Who knows where? He doesn't say. Christopher Mellon, a former Deputy Assistant Defense Secretary for Intelligence from 1997 to 2002, has confirmed that he was present during this testimony. He himself has been quite outspoken about the phenomenon over the past few years. Dr. David Clark, an investigative journalist, reader, and lecturer at Sheffield Hallam University, who was also the curator for the National Archives UFO project from 2008-2013, came across some interesting documents suggesting that the UK was desperate to capture UFO technology. Paul Hellyer, the former Canadian Defence Minister, claimed that the protocol when military jets were scrambled to intercept a UFO was to shoot first and ask questions later. Paul Hellyer has been talking about making disclosure of UFOs and various types of ETs among us in the world for decades now, and he says that some of them look just like us. If you were to pass them on the street, you would not be able to know that they were extraterrestrials. Now, going back to this, these are simply a few of the many examples that lend credibility to how government has viewed UFOs over the decades. Interestingly, the most viewed document in the FBI archive is about a supposed crash of 3 UFOs that contained bodies inside. Have governments done anything with this technology? Documents obtained by the Drive show that revolutionary technology that has a capability to alter space-time may actually be operable, according to Naval Aviation Enterprise Chief Technology Officer Dr. James Sheehy, seen in the picture, and you can read the story in the link here. Now, what about the supposed bodies? How did these objects crash? Were they brought down by us? I hope not, but given the nature of our race, it's not likely to assume that we would be more of a threat to life in the cosmos than an extraterrestrial space-faring race would be to us. Because if they had such a technology to have interstellar flight, obviously they're much more advanced in technology than we are today. But that's just us speculating. I don't know what I would do, he says, to find interesting about the phenomenon is that most of the examples that are available in the public domain show that they perform evasive maneuvers that we can't today. This has been emphasized by many, like Canadian Defence Minister Paul Hellyer in 2008, General Nathan Twining in the 1940s, and more recently Richard F. Haynes, a senior NASA research scientist for more than 2 decades now. In my research, I haven't really come across anything that is indicative of a threat, so I hope mainstream coverage and government disclosure doesn't take it there. That doesn't mean that there aren't legitimate national security concerns, but to take the stance that these objects represent a threat does not seem to be evidence-based, in my opinion. Why is this important? Mainstream UFO disclosure can be confusing. For example, why is the military witness testimony of certain pilots involved in a UFO incident that was released and confirmed by the Pentagon a few years ago credible and worthy of mainstream coverage, but the testimony of a high-ranking Air Force colonel like Ross Didrikson not brought up at all? This is because Didrikson claimed to have knowledge about extraterrestrials and what they are concerned about. Is this going too far for people? Again, who dictates and determines what is too much for people to handle? Who determines what is credible and not credible? Is it because there is no data about ETs, or is it because the data about ETs is being withheld, just as the data about UFOs were withheld? When UFOs were ridiculed, there was a lot of evidence for their existence. There's a lot of evidence for the idea that some of these objects are not human in origin, but again, a lot of people still have feelings about taking it there. Will we ever get the entire truth? Krauss states in his article that the government may or may not care about the resolution of the UFO enigma, but in throwing up its hands and granting that there are things it simply cannot figure out, it has relaxed its grip on the taboo. For many, this has been a comfort. No, we're talking here the government, we're talking about the US government, because there have been many other governments worldwide that have made disclosures on UFOs and ETs. Now, but going back to the article, it's great to see and know that this topic is no longer taboo to discuss. But again, it's unfortunate that there seems to be a mainstream culture, for lack of a better word, that dictates what can be spoken about still. Why does this culture get to decide when something is taboo or not? Furthermore, if governments and intelligence agencies come out and say, this is what we know, can we really trust them at this point? Is it really all they know? Is releasing some information a way to stop the conversation about it, or at least limit it? For example, when a program of information is declassified, how can we be so certain that that's all there is to it? Is more information concealed for national security purposes or other purposes? What implications might that secrecy still have? Media and government manipulation is something citizens always have been wary of. A CIA document pertaining to media and government relationships states that the CIA task force, quote, now has relationships with reporters from every major wire service, newspaper, news weekly, and television network in the nation, and that this has helped us turn some intelligent failure stories into intelligent success stories and has contributed to the accuracy of countless others. The agency has persuaded reporters to postpone, change, hold, or even scrap stories that could have adversely affected national security interests or jeopardized sources and methods, end quote. Let's not forget about Operation Mockingbird, and I'll talk about that in another video. Although it is a document outlining their desire to become more open and transparent, the deception outlined by various whistleblowers and pieces of evidence requires us to read between the lines and recognize that the relationships shared between intelligence agencies and our sources of information are not always warranted and pose inherent conflicts of interest. Here lies the problem. What is national security, and who determines that definition? JFK bravely told the world that the, quote, dangers of excessive and unwarranted concealment of pertinent facts far outweigh the dangers which are cited to justify it. There is very grave danger that an announced need for increased security will be seized upon by those anxious to expand its meaning to the very limits of official censorship and concealment, end quote. Now, what are the justifications for UFO secrecy? Don't get me wrong, I'm quite convinced that there are many people within government, normal people like you and me, who simply want to know what this phenomenon is all about and are passionate about truth and transparency. It's a complicated topic because it's been drenched in secrecy for years. As far as why this secrecy has occurred is an entirely different discussion. Perhaps this campaign of secrecy was done with the best of intentions, and perhaps not. Perhaps it's and was a mix of both. I don't know, but there's nothing wrong with discussing and speculating, especially in a time where speculation and opinion are being condemned in multiple fields. I also believe there are other reasons for secrecy that go beyond, quote, it's too much for the people to handle, and that it's a national security issue, end quote. These reasons may go into protecting certain interests like profits of the energy industry, among others. Based on my research, any type of technology that can release humanity's dependence on big corporations is somehow always kept on the back burner, at least until it can be monopolized and put out in a way that benefits those who control it. UFO technology could perhaps collapse the entire economy and our way of life as we know it by offering new modes of energy generation that, as Tesla once said, use the wheel work of nature. Maybe that's a good thing. Maybe there are ways to provide abundance to all without requiring us to work within our current demanding lifestyles. Perhaps we don't have to be dependent on money. Reasons like this are sometimes hard for people to examine. It can be scary for some to even contemplate the idea of a government or powerful set of people who are actively taking measures to prevent humanity from thriving. Perhaps that is a conspiracy theory. Perhaps it's not. I do believe there's enough information and evidence to at least have that conversation, and I think it's an important one to have and consider. But as you could note by my above statements, the UFO topic has the potential to change how we live our day-to-day lives in society due to what abundance it can provide for the average person. new technologies, free energy, for example. While this is not obvious when exploring the subject, this has been one of the drivers of our passionate research over the years. Now, the takeaway, the conclusion. It's been said many times, I don't think we'll ever get anything sufficient from government disclosure that what's already known about the phenomenon among researchers who have been studying it for decades. So don't get your hopes up. Perhaps the fact that these objects are real is all we will get, but who knows? Is this an issue where the citizenry has to take initiative to find out more? Why is the idea, for example, of trying to make contact with these objects in a citizen initiative way taboo or crazy within the mainstream? If we want to find out more about this topic, perhaps we have to try and do so ourselves. Why is it that when government tries to find out, it's official, but when citizens try to do it, it's a cult? Are human beings at a point in our culture where we are capable of exploring this topic without labeling phenomena as demonic or angelic? Can't we just accept that there may be other consciousnesses in the universe that takes on a similar but different physical form? The discussion of what these objects are seems to be the next step, and it's being had, but it's taken decades for the topic to exit the taboo realm. How long will it take for the implications of the phenomenon deeper questions that it leads to be considered no longer taboo? It leaves no aspect of humanity untouched. It goes into consciousness, physics, the nature of our society, history, other dimensions, and more. But many people within this community don't want to go there until it's confirmed by a credible source. In my opinion, it's a problem. Some sources the masses rely on as credible are more manipulative than credible, and that's something we have to come to terms with. It's okay to speculate. Perhaps our definition of evidence needs to change in order to go above and beyond the limitations of science. This is on Humans Are Free. Please leave your comments, and thank you for your support.